Let's take a look at some screenshots I've captured here, and there should be pieces of it in here that should look familiar to anyone in the various skill sets, because we are bridging traditional ETL on modern technology. So at a first look, this is our launching Hydrograph. You'll notice different aspects of the GUI that we have displayed here. And they should look very familiar to some folks' experience with ETL technology. But if you look at the top left, we have sort of these what we call building blocks to create our graph. And the main thing here is that you can work on here and execute locally and also sort of deploy what you're built into production. So the idea of Hydrograph having a UI is for developer productivity. And I have a bunch of screenshots here. I'm just going to go through some of them. Obviously, this was the top left, some components. These are plug and play. And these are areas that we encourage folks to contribute to leverage in your environment, whatever makes sense there. This should look very familiar to Java developers, is the reason why we chose this stack. It's a direct plug-in to some enterprise CI/CD practices of DevOps, one of the great features here. This, again, is just the canvas, a little bit zoomed in to the actual graph. And for this particular demonstration, there's one output from this application. And I think, so this is just the console, and then we have some slides to show. So this is what we're talking about, where our input sources are. And then there's very configurable properties we have in these input sources. They're different for various types of input, but just to show some areas that we've made it easy to leverage these reusable components. And then there's also the aspect of how we integrate this with our other services. And the idea is, if you think about it, this is an input data source. We have a particular schema, right? And the beauty of Hydrograph is we expose this as an artifact that can be utilized by downstream or upstream systems. So particularly for us, if you think about what this is, it's more about governance of the metadata of a file, right? What's in the file, what is the layout. So this is very extensible how you can plug it into your environment. We plug this into our metadata governance platform. And then let's walk through some of these. Like we said, these are some transformation components we can pull in. Just show you some of the logic. It's very similar to, each component has different configuration properties. And these we chose as areas for this transformation component. But each one has different, it's sort of like a template to how to create your logic for the manipulation. This is going into more detail. This is a simple one. If you look at what it's showing, basically we want to remove data immediately that we don't need for this application. So it's very drag and drop. Basically those are propagated once you define a schema for your file. And this particular component that we're manipulating is if you look on the left-hand side, we start with 8 or 9 sort of attributes. And just a simple example how we're quickly eliminating that down. And this is simple a drag and drop sort of environment. There's a little bit more functionality we can do here. If you look at the top, we could actually do a manipulation of those attributes within this component. So there's a lot of different features that you can leverage. Quickly, who doesn't need to filter out some data? Just a quick yes-no flow sort of idea. We built out that too, so I won't go into all these different interfaces for each component. But just to show, we have some pre-built functions too. You can always load in more yourself. You want to build in some and add them. This should look very familiar to sort of Java background developers. Your Java docs is on the bottom right. And you can create a large variety of functions that your enterprise or wherever you're working in want to reuse. This is the same sort of feature here, just showing different capabilities of the tool. There's a lot of capabilities, so I just pulled out some key ones here that people can relate to and sort of understand from what you want to do of data, right? So we have some built-in test suites that you can do quickly from the development interface. Just flowing through this example, right? So this aggregate, if you think about it, what if you want to do a running sum, or you want to do a min-max sort of logic? You can do it here. So we thought through all these manipulations and created these set of components. We have around 20 data manipulation components right now, around 20 or so input-output sources. And we found a combination of these. You can manipulate your data to whatever you need in the end result. And obviously, there's a lot of room for adding in your own sort of logic if you want to create something custom, if it makes sense for your area that you're working with, and you want to reuse these components. This is a very similar sort of layout. You saw this a little earlier, right? It's a great way to sort of drag and drop your interface. So consistent interface here, right? You see these are the exact fields that go from input to output. But if you look at what we're doing here, right, I'm doing a sum of the payments. And I didn't show you this on the previous screen, but you can actually set your keys you want to use. So this account, for this application, we're summing the payments on an account ID. And this is the code snippet. I won't show this for too long, but this is some of the custom logic you can also build in. If you're familiar with Java, we basically have these templates that you can fill it in. And when it executes, it knows to pull these in. Once again, we'll just run through an example. So here's a join. Join is quite simple, right? We're just merging two files together. You can choose what kind of join. Also, you can see what fields come in from each of these files. So it's a great visual verification of what you did. And this is sort of the execution environment. You can see here in the bottom left, we're trying to show what has been completed and what is currently running. It runs really fast for this example. So you'll see that we don't have all the statuses, but in the middle, you see those two blue check marks. That means those have completed. And then the timer is sort of where it's still processing. We have ways that you can inspect at different areas. It's a post run. So if you remember the previous slide, after we execute and see what happens, you can see what went on at every stage of the data movement.